They called themselves America's Most Colorful Hillbilly Band. The Maddox Brothers and Rose fled starvation in Alabama to become the pioneers of honky-tonk. Their sound, an explosive mix of country, blues, and early rock and roll, was fueled by a revolutionary slap bass rhythm and the explosive vocals of their sister, Rose. But this is the tragedy. The family bond that saved them from poverty was the very thing that destroyed them. Jealousy over Rose, fights for money and control, turned love into decades of hateful silence. They built a legend together and then burned it down themselves. What fueled the frantic energy of the Maddox brothers and Rose? What ignited that volatile mix of love and resentment? The answer isn't found under the neon lights of a stage. We have to travel back beyond the recording studios, back to the source, the unforgiving red clay soil of Boaz, Alabama, the 1930s. This was the nadir of the Great Depression, when the American dream felt like a cruel mirage, especially for tenant farmers trapped in debt and failure. Charlie and Lula Maddox were poor sharecroppers in Alabama, pushed to the brink by the Great Depression and facing starvation. Charlie decided in 1933 to take his wife and 7 children on a desperate migration west to California. The journey was incredibly arduous. Despised as Okies, the family of 9 endured poverty and contempt, which forged an unbreakable family bond. They settled in Modesto, California, continuing their lives as seasonal farm laborers and living in makeshift camps. In this harsh environment, music became a comfort. The Maddox children absorbed gospel, country, and especially the vibrant Western swing rhythms popular on the West Coast. The brothers taught themselves instruments, while Rose, though very young, revealed a powerful and unique voice. Their father, Charlie, saw his children's talent as the only way out of poverty. In 1937, he convinced a Modesto furniture store to sponsor the family band for a 15-minute slot on the local radio station KTRB. Rose was just 11 years old. That first broadcast of the Maddox Brothers and Rose was a hit. Charlie immediately became their manager, booking every gig he could, from dances and fairs to bars. He transformed his family from seasonal laborers into a traveling enterprise, beginning their journey to fight their way out of poverty with music. KTRB radio spot in Modesto, secured by Charlie Maddox's sheer nerve, wasn't just a lucky break. It was the lighting of a fuse. For the Maddox Brothers and Rose, it was the first tentative step out of the grueling cycle of agricultural labor and into the unpredictable, potentially dazzling world of show business. But the journey from a 15-minute sponsored radio segment to becoming America's most colorful hillbilly band wasn't instantaneous. The late 1930s and early 1940s were years of relentless work, constant hustle, and the crucial period where they didn't just learn to play music together. They invented their sound and their unforgettable stage persona, forged in the rough-and-tumble honky-tonks and dance halls of California. Charlie Maddox, now fully embracing his role as manager, pushed them relentlessly. He understood that a radio spot was only valuable if it translated into live gigs. He booked them anywhere and everywhere, across the Central Valley and beyond. Farm auctions, veterans halls, company picnics, rowdy bars where sawdust covered the floors, and fights might break out at any moment. This wasn't the polite theater circuit. This was entertainment for working people, migrants, soldiers on leave, people who wanted music that was loud, fast, and cathartic. It was in these venues, playing for demanding crowds who wanted to dance and forget their troubles, that the Maddoxes truly honed their craft. They learned how to read an audience, how to keep the energy high for hours on end, how to project over the noise of a crowded room. Musically, they were like sponges, absorbing everything around them in the vibrant, diverse California scene. while they kept the core instrumentation of country music: fiddle, acoustic guitars, mandolin, upright bass. They infused it with influences that were miles away from Nashville orthodoxy. Western swing, with its jazzy improvisations, complex rhythms, and use of amplified instruments, was king in California, and its sophisticated energy clearly rubbed off on them. Don Maddox, in particular, developed a flashy, technically impressive style on both fiddle and electric guitar that owed as much to swing players as it did to traditional country. Cal's driving rhythm guitar became the engine, pushing the tempo relentlessly. But it was Fred Maddox who perhaps made the most revolutionary contribution to their sound. Upright bass in traditional country music often played a simple, supportive role. Fred, however, developed a powerful slap bass technique. By pulling the strings away from the fingerboard and letting them slap back, he created a percussive, rhythmic thump that acted almost like a drum kit. This slap bass wasn't just accompaniment, it was a lead instrument, driving the beat, giving their music an aggressive, danceable pulse that was utterly infectious. Decades before rockabilly made the slap bass famous, Fred Maddox was pioneering it night after night in California honky-tonks. It became the undeniable rhythmic signature of the Maddox sound. They also weren't afraid to borrow from other genres circulating in California's multi-ethnic communities. They heard blues in the fields and camps, jump blues blaring from jukeboxes, the harmonies of gospel quartets in churches. They incorporated bluesy phrasing into their vocals, and instrumentation added boogie-woogie piano licks when they could find a pianist, and infused their gospel numbers with a syncopated, swinging feel that bordered on secular. This wasn't a calculated fusion. It was an organic outgrowth of their environment and their own restless energy. They played what felt good, what made people dance, regardless of genre boundaries. Simultaneously, Charlie and Lula were crafting their visual identity. Lula, with remarkable talent and resourcefulness, began creating the flamboyant stage outfits that would become their trademark. Working with cheap fabrics but an extravagant imagination, she fashioned suits and dresses in the brightest colors imaginable: shocking pink, electric blue, canary yellow, emerald green, often adorned with contrasting piping, applique designs, and as much glitter, sequins, rhinestones, and fringe as they could possibly afford or attach. Each sibling might have a slightly different variation, but the overall effect was a coordinated, dazzling spectacle. This wasn't just about looking good. It was a deliberate strategy, a form of branding years before the term was common in music. Charlie understood that in crowded bars and large dance halls, visibility mattered. The bright colors made them instantly recognizable, even from the back of the room. It also projected an image of success and confidence that defied their humble origins, while Nashville stars cultivated an image of down-home sincerity, often dressing in relatively conservative Western suits. The Maddoxes presented themselves as larger-than-life entertainers, almost cartoon characters sprung to life. They were loud visually, matching the volume and energy of their music. This bold aesthetic resonated powerfully with their West Coast audience and earned them the billing that stuck: America's Most Colorful Hillbilly Band. It was pure P.T. Barnum applied to country music, and it worked brilliantly. And at the center of this whirlwind of color and sound was Rose. As she grew from a preteen into a young woman during the early 1940s, her talent blossomed, and her stage presence became magnetic. She wasn't just the girl singer, she was the spark plug, the emotional core, the connection to the audience. Her voice gained depth and power, capable of expressing heartbreak, defiance, and pure joy with equal conviction. She learned how to work a crowd, how to banter with her brothers, how to inject personality into every syllable. She moved with energy, often dancing as she sang, a stark contrast to the often static female vocalist of the era. She radiated a confidence and a sassy, independent spirit that was captivating and, for the time, quite radical. Dressed in Lula's most dazzling creation, she was impossible to ignore, the undisputed star around whom the family band revolved. The outbreak of World War II temporarily disrupted their momentum. Some of the brothers served in the military. But even during the war years, the band continued in various configurations whenever possible, playing for troops at USO shows and military bases, honing their skills and further solidifying their regional popularity. The post-war boom years, however, were when they truly hit their stride. California was booming, filled with returning soldiers, factory workers flush with cash, and a population eager for entertainment after years of wartime austerity. Dance halls and honky-tonks thrived, and the Maddox Brothers and Rose were perfectly positioned to capitalize. Their reputation as a must-see live act spread throughout the state. It was during this fertile period, around 1946, that they caught the attention of Don Pierce, an A&R man, for 4 Star Records. 4 Star was a Los Angeles-based independent label specializing in West Coast country and hillbilly music. It wasn't a major label like RCA or Columbia, but it had a knack for recording raw, authentic talent often overlooked by Nashville. Pierce recognized the unique energy and commercial potential of the Maddoxes. Signing with 4 Star was a crucial step, giving them their first real opportunity to capture their sound on record and reach a wider audience beyond California. Their 4 Star sessions, recorded between 1946 and 1951, are now considered classics, landmark recordings that captured the band at their raw, energetic peak. These records weren't polished according to Nashville standards. They often had a rough live feel, crackling with the same energy that defined their stage shows. They cut dozens of sides for the label, showcasing the full breadth of their eclectic style. There were the high-octane boogie numbers that became their specialty, George's Playhouse Boogie, an instrumental rave-up likely named after a favorite venue, Water Baby Boogie, driven by Fred's relentless slap bass, the infectious hangover blues. These tracks were pure dance fuel, prefiguring the energy of rockabilly with their driving rhythms and Don Maddox's wild electric guitar solos, which often incorporated feedback and distortion in ways that were highly unusual for the time. They also recorded novelty songs and story songs, often infused with their trademark humor and irreverence. Their version of Woody Guthrie's folk tune, Philadelphia Lawyer, became one of their most popular numbers, transformed into a rowdy tale of infidelity and courtroom drama, punctuated by shouts and asides from the brothers. Rose shone on sassy numbers like Sally Let Your Bangs Hang Down, a song full of playful innuendo, delivered with her signature wink and swagger. But they could also deliver moments of genuine pathos. Rose's rendition of the sentimental ballad Tramp on the Street, a cautionary tale about a fallen woman, was heartbreakingly effective. And their gospel numbers, like Gathering Flowers for the Master's Bouquet, showcase their tight family harmonies in a more traditional yet still powerful context. Perhaps the most historically significant recording from this era was their electrifying version of Milk Cow Blues. Already a blues standard recorded by artists ranging from Sleepy John Estes to Bob Wills, the Maddoxes transformed it into something entirely new. They sped up the tempo dramatically, anchored it with Fred's propulsive slap bass, layered on Don's stinging electric guitar fills, and let Rose belt out the lyrics with a mixture of country twang and bluesy grit. It was a perfect distillation of their sound. Traditional roots music supercharged with modern energy and attitude. It wasn't just a cover, it was a reinvention, a clear signpost pointing towards the future of rock and roll. While not a massive chart hit nationally at the time, its influence rippled outwards, particularly among musicians. These four-star records weren't making them rich. Independent labels often operated on shoestring budgets, and royalty payments could be dubious, but they significantly raised their profile. Their records were popular on West Coast radio stations and jukeboxes. They started getting booked for appearances on more prestigious shows, most notably the Louisiana Hayride, broadcast live from Shreveport, Louisiana. The Hayride was a crucial stepping stone, second only to the Grand Ole Opry in importance. Known as the Cradle of the Stars, it was famous for featuring newer, sometimes rougher talent than the Opry. Performing on the Hayride meant sharing the stage with established stars like Webb Pierce and Farron Young, but also with electrifying newcomers like Hank Williams, and, soon after the Maddoxes arrived, a young phenomenon named Elvis Presley. Being regulars on the Hayride gave them national exposure and credibility within the country music industry. Imagine the scene: the flamboyant Maddox clan tearing through a high-energy boogie number, followed by the brooding intensity of Hank Williams or the revolutionary hip swivels of Elvis. It was a melting pot of styles, and the Maddoxes held their own, their unique energy captivating the Shreveport audience. Their growing fame also led to appearances in several low-budget Hollywood B-Western movies in the late 1940s and early 50s, such as Square Dance Jubilee. These weren't starring roles. They typically appeared as themselves, performing a song or two, essentially serving as musical interludes. But these film appearances, however minor, helped solidify their image as America's most colorful hillbilly band in the national consciousness, putting their dazzling costumes and energetic performances on the silver screen. Life on the road during this period was a whirlwind. They graduated from cramped cars to slightly less cramped station wagons, and eventually, perhaps, to a used bus. But the schedule was relentless. Charlie booked them constantly, determined to capitalize on their rising fame. They played dances, fairs, rodeos, package shows, traveling thousands of miles, often performing multiple shows in different towns on the same day. Sleep was scarce, meals were eaten on the run, and privacy was non-existent. They were still a family unit, traveling together, working together, living together 24/7. While this fostered a unique musical telepathy on stage, it also inevitably created friction off stage. The normal tensions of family life were amplified 1,000 times by the pressures of constant performance and travel. Despite the hardships, this was also a period of intense creativity and growing confidence. They were becoming seasoned professionals, masters of their craft. They knew how to entertain, how to connect with an audience, how to deliver a show-stopping performance every single night. Their reputation preceded them. By the dawn of the 1950s, the Maddox Brothers and Rose were no longer just California curiosities. They were a nationally recognized act, one of the hottest, most unique bands in country music. It was this growing prominence combined with frustrations over 4 stars limitations that led them to seek a bigger stage. In 1951, they signed a contract with Columbia Records, one of the largest and most prestigious record labels in the world. This was the big time. This was the move that promised to take them from regional stars to national superstars, putting them alongside Columbia's roster of pop and country giants. It felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for since leaving Alabama nearly 2 decades earlier. They had arrived. The Columbia deal brought better production values, wider distribution, and more sophisticated promotion. They continued to record high-energy numbers, like the Hoot Owl Boogie, and showcased Rose on hits like the sharply worded divorce anthem, Alimony. Their sound perhaps became slightly more polished under Columbia's producers, losing a tiny bit of the raw edge of the four-star days, but their core energy remained. They toured even more extensively, their fees increased, and their status as major country music figures seemed secure. They were regulars on the Grand Ole Opry now, the pinnacle of country music success. Externally, they were riding high. They had achieved the dream: fame, relative fortune, and artistic recognition. But internally, the pressures were mounting. The move to Columbia intensified the scrutiny and the commercial demands. Charlie's tight grip on management continued to cause friction. The sibling dynamics, particularly the focus on Rose, became more complex. Rose herself, now a bona fide star in her mid-20s, was growing increasingly independent, chafing under family control, and navigating the complexities of her own personal life in the public eye. The seeds of conflict, sown during the long years on the road, were beginning to sprout, hidden just beneath the dazzling surface of America's most colorful hillbilly band. The greatest successes often carry within them the potential for the greatest fall. Signing with Columbia Records in 1951 catapulted the Maddox Brothers and Rose onto a new level. They were no longer just West Coast sensations or favorites on the Louisiana Hayride circuit. They were now part of the country music major leagues, rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in the business. This era, stretching into the mid-1950s, represented the apex of their commercial success and national visibility. They became regulars, albeit sometimes controversial ones, due to their boisterous style on the hallowed stage of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. Opry membership was the ultimate validation in country music, a sign that they had truly arrived. Even if their rowdy energy sometimes clashed with the Opry's more conservative image, manager Jim Denny, who ran the Opry Artists Bureau, reportedly found their unpredictable stage antics and flamboyant costumes somewhat jarring, but their popularity was undeniable. Their Columbia recordings, while perhaps lacking some of the raw, almost unhinged edge of their four-star sides, were still potent and popular. Producers like Don Law tried to harness their energy within slightly more structured arrangements, sometimes adding session musicians or background vocalists in line with the developing Nashville sound aesthetic. They scored significant hits like the Hoot Owl Boogie, a classic example of their up-tempo, novelty-tinged style, and Rose's signature solo number, Alimony, a sharply witty and defiant take on divorce that showcased her unique persona. It was a bold song for a woman to sing in the early 1950s, tackling a taboo subject with humor and grit, further cementing Rose's image as an independent firebrand. Other popular Columbia sides included I Love You 1,000 Ways, No More Time, and Fugitive's Lament. Their touring schedule became even more relentless. They were now in demand across the entire country, playing larger venues, state fairs, and lucrative package tours alongside other country stars. Their bus, emblazoned with their colorful name, became a familiar sight on American highways. They were making good money, certainly more than they had ever dreamed of back in Alabama or the Modesto labor camps. They bought homes, cars, and enjoyed the fruits of their hard-won success. Visually, they remained as dazzling as ever, perhaps even more so with access to better materials and professional designers who could augment Lula's creations. They were living, breathing embodiments of the post-war American dream, poor country kids who had made it big through sheer talent and determination. But this intense period of success coincided with seismic shifts in the American musical landscape, shifts that the Maddoxes had ironically helped to initiate, but would ultimately find themselves struggling against. The mid-1950s saw the explosive arrival of rock and roll. Elvis Presley, whom they had known from the Hayride, became a global phenomenon, seemingly overnight. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, a new generation of artists was capturing the imagination of young audiences with a sound that was even louder, faster, and more rebellious than the Maddoxes' hillbilly boogie. Suddenly, the Maddoxes, who had been the wild outliers, started to sound, well, perhaps a little less wild in comparison. Their music, still rooted in country instrumentation and themes, faced intense competition on the radio and jukeboxes from this electrifying new genre. Columbia Records, like all major labels, shifted its focus towards capturing the lucrative teenage market dominated by rock and roll. While the Maddoxes still had a loyal country audience, their potential for mainstream crossover, which had seemed so promising just a few years earlier, began to wane. Their record sales, while still respectable, weren't achieving the blockbuster status of the new rock and roll stars. This changing musical climate added another layer of pressure and uncertainty to the already complex internal dynamics of the band. Were they country? Were they rockabilly? Should they adapt their sound further or stick to their roots? These questions likely fueled debates within the group and with their management and label. The ground beneath their feet was shifting, and the path forward was no longer as clear as it had once seemed. It was against this backdrop of peak success, shifting musical tastes, and the relentless demands of the road that the internal fractures within the Maddox family began to widen into deep, potentially irreparable cracks. The very elements that had defined them, their tight family structure, Rose's star power, Charlie's firm control, now became sources of escalating conflict. The issue of money and management remained a persistent sore point. Charlie Maddox had guided them from obscurity to stardom, and his patriarchal control had been absolute in the early years. But now, his children were adults, seasoned professionals, with families and financial responsibilities of their own. They increasingly desired more transparency and a greater say in how the band's substantial earnings were managed and distributed. Johnny Whiteside's biography, Ramblin' Rose, delves into these complexities, suggesting that Charlie, while not necessarily dishonest, ran the operation in an old-fashioned, perhaps opaque manner. Records might not have been meticulously kept. Deals might have been made based on handshakes, and the division of profits could seem arbitrary or favor certain members over others. Maxine, in particular, who had been involved in the business side early on, reportedly clashed frequently with her father over financial matters. She felt the brothers and Rose weren't always getting their fair share, or that decisions were being made without adequate consultation. These weren't just business disagreements. They were family arguments, laden with years of history, perceived slights, and the complex emotions that swirl around money within any family, let alone one operating under the high stakes of the entertainment industry. Did Charlie see it as his right, as the father and founder, to control the purse strings? Did the siblings feel they were still being treated like children rather than partners? These tensions simmered constantly. The physical and emotional toll of nonstop touring cannot be overstated. Imagine spending 250, 300 days a year on the road, crammed into a bus with the same 6 or 7 people, your siblings, your parents, playing high-energy shows night after night, grabbing sleep when you could, eating unhealthy road food, dealing with promoters, equipment breakdowns, bad weather, and the constant pressure to perform. It was physically exhausting and mentally draining. There was no personal space, no real escape. Small annoyances could fester into major resentments. The constant proximity magnified every personality clash, every perceived injustice. Fred Maddox, known for his steadiness, later spoke about the sheer weariness of the road as a major factor in his decision to leave. He simply burned out. For the others, the grind likely contributed to frayed nerves, short tempers, and a longing for a normalcy they could never quite attain, while the band was their entire life. The issue of Rose's stardom and the resulting sibling rivalry also intensified during this period. As their fame grew, the media and the public increasingly focused on Rose. She was the glamorous one, the charismatic one, the voice everyone recognized. While this was crucial to their success, it inevitably created an imbalance. The brothers, especially Don with his flashy musicianship, could feel like hired hands rather than integral parts of the creative force. Interviews often centered on Rose. Promotional photos often featured her prominently. It wasn't necessarily malicious, but the subtle ways the industry prioritized the front woman could breed resentment. Were their contributions being valued equally? Did Rose fully appreciate their role in her success? Conversely, did Rose feel burdened by the expectation of carrying the band, or constrained by her brother's protectiveness? It was a classic trap for family bands, where professional roles collided messily with lifelong personal dynamics. And then there was Rose's tumultuous personal life, which continued to be a source of both fascination for the public and considerable stress within the family. Her fiery independence, while a key part of her appeal, made her resistant to control, whether from her father, her brothers, or industry handlers. Her romantic life remained complex. After her first marriage ended, she married Don Ford in the early 1950s, but that marriage also proved troubled and eventually ended in divorce. There were other relationships, other dramas, played out against the backdrop of their relentless touring schedule. For Charlie and the brothers, Rose's personal choices were often seen through the lens a potential scandal or disruption to the band's carefully cultivated image. They worried about gossip columns, about upsetting conservative fans or promoters. Their attempts to advise or intervene, however well-intentioned, likely felt like judgment and control to Rose. She was earning her own money, living her own life, and fiercely guarded her autonomy. This fundamental clash, the family's desire for stability and control versus Rose's insistence on living life on her own terms, became a constant source of friction, leading to explosive arguments and deepening distrust. The shadow of the secret adoption around 1950 also lingered, an unspoken trauma that undoubtedly affected Rose profoundly and likely strained her relationship with the family members who were privy to the secret and involved in the difficult decisions surrounding it. While the full details remained hidden for decades, the emotional weight of carrying that secret, the grief, the potential guilt or shame imposed by the era's social norms must have been immense. Did she feel supported by her family during that time, or did she feel pressured and isolated? How did the need for absolute secrecy impact their already complex interactions? It represents perhaps the deepest, most painful intersection of Rose's personal struggles and the demands of maintaining the Maddox brothers and Rose facade. By the mid-1950s, all these pressures, financial stress, tour fatigue, sibling rivalry, Rose's personal dramas, the changing musical landscape, were converging. The joy seemed to be draining out of the enterprise. On stage, they could still turn it on, delivering electrifying performances fueled by muscle memory and professionalism. But off stage, the camaraderie was reportedly evaporating, replaced by tense silences or outright arguments. The family unit, once their greatest strength, was becoming their greatest liability. The first definitive crack appeared in 1956. Fred Maddox, the eldest brother, the steady bassist, the one who often acted as the peacemaker and organizer, had had enough. At 37, after nearly 20 years on the road since he was a teenager, he was weary of the constant travel, the internal bickering, the whole chaotic circus. He wanted a different life, a chance to settle down, perhaps start a business, and escape the relentless demands of being a Maddox brother. He announced he was quitting the band and retiring from music. Fred's departure was more than just the loss of a bass player. It was the removal of the band's foundation. He had been there from the absolute beginning, the one constant through all the lineup shuffles and stylistic changes. His slap bass was the rhythmic engine of their sound. His calm presence had often balanced out the more volatile personalities. Without Fred, the delicate equilibrium of the band was shattered. The remaining brothers, Cal, Don, Henry, and Cliff, along with Rose, tried to carry on. They hired other musicians to fill Fred's spot. They fulfilled existing bookings, but the energy, the unique chemistry, wasn't the same. Fred's absence left a gaping hole, both musically and emotionally. It forced everyone to confront the reality that the band, as they had known it, was unsustainable. The momentum quickly dissipated. Within months of Fred's departure, the remaining members recognized the inevitable. The arguments likely intensified. The exhaustion felt heavier without the prospect of continued big success. One by one, or perhaps in a collective, weary acknowledgement, the decision was made. The Maddox Brothers and Rose, after nearly 2 decades of defining a sound and dazzling audiences, officially disbanded in late 1956 or early 1957. There was no grand announcement, no farewell tour. Like many family arguments, it ended not with a bang, but with a painful, exhausted whimper. The most colorful band in America simply stopped. The members scattered, each facing an uncertain future, carrying the heavy baggage of shared history, broken bonds, and the lingering echo of a sound the world would never hear quite the same way again. The dream, chased so hard for so long, had finally run its course, leaving behind a legacy of brilliant music and the quiet devastation of a family fractured by the very forces that had propelled them to stardom. Rose, however, wasn't ready to be silent. The end of the family band was, for her, just the beginning of the next unpredictable chapter. The official disbanding of the Maddox Brothers and Rose around late 1956 or early 1957 wasn't a clean break. It was more like the messy, painful aftermath of a protracted family feud, finally reaching its exhausted conclusion. There were no press releases lamenting the end of an era, no grand farewell performances. The most colorful band in America simply ceased to be a functioning unit, its members scattering like seeds from a burst pod, each carrying a complex mix of relief, resentment, and uncertainty about what came next. The relentless forward motion that had propelled them from Alabama poverty to national fame shuddered to a halt, leaving a void filled not with music, but with the heavy silence of unresolved conflict. For Fred Maddox, the eldest brother, the decision to leave had been brewing for some time. He was approaching 40, weary of the constant travel, the chaotic lifestyle, and perhaps the unending drama that seemed to swirl around the band, particularly Rose. His departure wasn't just about retiring from the group. It was largely a retirement from the music business altogether. He sought anonymity and stability, eventually settling down, running businesses, reportedly including a restaurant and bar at different times, and firmly closing the door on his past life as a hillbilly boogie pioneer. While his innovative slap bass style was a crucial foundational element of their sound and a significant influence on the burgeoning rockabilly genre, Fred himself seemed content to let that legacy exist primarily on old records. His withdrawal marked the definitive end of the classic Maddox Brothers and Rose lineup and removed the figure who had often served, however imperfectly, as the band's pragmatic anchor. The other brothers, Cal, Don, Henry, and Cliff, found themselves adrift professionally. They were talented musicians, seasoned performers, but their identities had been inextricably linked to the family band for nearly 20 years. They attempted various musical ventures in the ensuing years. Cal Maddox, the driving rhythm guitarist, reportedly played with other West Coast country acts and did some solo recording, but never achieved widespread recognition. Henry, the mandolin player, also largely faded from the national music scene. Cliff, who had sometimes played guitar with the group, similarly pursued other paths. Don Maddox, however, proved the most musically persistent of the brothers besides Rose. Known for his flashy fiddle playing, often incorporating tricks like playing behind his back or between his legs, and his early adoption of the electric guitar, Don was a natural showman. He continued performing, sometimes leading his own groups, sometimes working as a sideman. While he never replicated the fame he'd known with the family band, he remained active in music sporadically over the decades. Decades later, as the last surviving member of the classic lineup, Don would experience a remarkable late-life resurgence. In his 80s and 90s, he became a beloved figure at roots music festivals, celebrated as a living link to the birth of Rockabilly. With his colorful storytelling and surprisingly energetic fiddle playing, he charmed new generations of fans, offering vivid first-hand accounts of the band's wild heyday, though his perspective on the family conflict sometimes differed significantly from Maxine's later published accounts. But in the immediate aftermath of the 1957 split, his future, like his brothers', was uncertain. But while the brothers largely receded from the national spotlight, Rose Maddox refused to fade away. For her, the breakup, however painful, was also an opportunity, a chance to finally step out entirely from her brother's shadows and forge her own identity. Music wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. She possessed the name recognition, the stage presence, the powerhouse voice, and crucially, the ambition to succeed on her own. Almost immediately after the family band dissolved, she set about launching her solo career with fierce determination. Her timing was fortuitous in one sense. Major labels were increasingly interested in cultivating solo country stars, both male and female. Rose quickly signed a contract with Capitol Records in Hollywood, a powerhouse label that was becoming a major force in country music, particularly with the West Coast sound. This placed her under the guidance of producer Ken Nelson, a key architect of the burgeoning Bakersfield sound, and the man who would guide the careers of superstars like Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, Ferlin Husky, and Gene Shepard. Nelson recognized Rose's unique talent, her ability to blend raw honky-tonk energy with heartfelt balladry, and saw her potential as a major solo artist. Working with Nelson, Rose embarked on the most commercially successful period of her career. The production on her Capitol Records was generally smoother and more polished than the often frantic Maddox Brothers recordings, aligning with the trends of the late 1950s and early 60s country music. Some critics might argue that a bit of the wildness was tamed, but Nelson wisely didn't try to completely sand down Rose's fiery edges. Her personality still shone through. Her first solo single for Capitol, Gambler's Love, released in 1957, was a moderate success, but she quickly followed it with bigger hits. Kissing My Pillow in 1961 became a significant chart success. Perhaps her biggest solo hit came in 1961 with Sing a Little Song of Heartache, which climbed into the top 5 of the Billboard country charts. These songs showcased her vocal versatility. She could deliver a cheating song with convincing spite, a love song with warmth, and a novelty number with infectious humor. She also proved adept at duets, another popular trend in country music at the time. Her most notable duet partnership was with a rising star also produced by Ken Nelson, Buck Owens. Before Buck became a superstar with his own signature Bakersfield sound, he and Rose recorded several tracks together. Their 1961 duet, Mental Cruelty, a fiery back and forth about a toxic relationship, was a top 10 hit and remains a classic example of the genre. They also found success with Loose Talk. These duets not only boosted Rose's solo career, but also helped introduce Buck Owens to a wider audience. Throughout the late 50s and early 60s, Rose Maddox was a consistent presence on the country charts and a popular touring act. She appeared frequently on syndicated country music television shows like Town Hall Party and Star Route. She maintained her reputation as a dynamic and engaging live performer, still favoring flashy, rhinestone-studded outfits, though perhaps slightly more sophisticated than the wild creations of her mother's era. She proved decisively that she could thrive without her brothers, carving out her own space as one of the leading female voices in country music, alongside stars like Kitty Wells and Gene Shepard. She was resilient, adaptable, and utterly professional, even while retaining that spark of untamed energy that had always defined her. Yet this solo success occurred against the backdrop of the profound and largely unrepaired family estrangement. The breakup of the band hadn't led to a period of cooling off followed by reconciliation. Rather, it seemed to solidify the divisions. While the exact reasons remained largely private for many years, hints emerged in interviews, and later Maxine's memoir laid bare the depth of the bitterness. Beyond finances, there were deep-seated personal conflicts and personality clashes. Rose's fierce independence and sometimes volatile personal life had been a source of friction for years. The brothers' attempts to manage her, whether out of genuine concern or desire for control, had bred resentment on both sides. Fred's departure likely shifted the internal power dynamics, perhaps leaving unresolved tensions between Rose and the remaining brothers, particularly Dawn, who also possessed a strong personality and considerable musical ambition. Years of living and working in each other's pockets, under intense pressure, had likely magnified personality quirks into major points of contention. Simple disagreements could escalate into shouting matches, fueled by exhaustion and alcohol, which reportedly flowed freely on the road. Maxine's memoir, Looking Back to See, provides the most detailed, albeit subjective, account of this period. She describes feeling increasingly marginalized, not just by management, but sometimes by her own brother, Jim Ed, during the Browns' similar trajectory, suggesting these dynamics were common. Applying her experience to the Maddoxes, one can infer similar feelings might have existed, a sense of being overshadowed, of artistic contributions being undervalued, of losing control over one's own career and image. She painted a picture of an industry, and sometimes family members, exploiting talent for profit, leaving emotional wreckage in their wake. While her perspective is undoubtedly colored by her own experiences and grievances, it offers a powerful glimpse into the potential psychological toll of being part of a family band under the relentless pressures of the music business. Beyond finances, there were deep-seated personal conflicts and personality clashes. Rose's fierce independence and sometimes volatile personal life had been a source of friction for years. The brothers' attempts to manage her, whether out of genuine concern or a desire for control, had bred resentment on both sides. Fred's departure likely shifted the internal power dynamics, perhaps leaving unresolved tensions between Rose and the remaining brothers, particularly Dawn, who also possessed a strong personality and considerable musical ambition. Years of living and working in each other's pockets under intense pressure had likely magnified personality quirks into major points of contention. Simple disagreements could escalate into shouting matches, fueled by exhaustion and alcohol, which reportedly flowed freely on the road. Biographer Johnny Whiteside, in Ramblin' Rose, The Life and Times of Rose Maddox, paints a picture of these complex dynamics. He details the struggles Rose faced asserting her autonomy against both industry expectations and family pressures. He chronicles the arguments, the walkouts, the delicate balance between fierce family loyalty and equally fierce individual will. Whiteside suggests that while deep love existed, the combination of close quarters, financial stress, professional jealousies, and Rose's own determination to live life unfiltered created an environment where conflict was almost inevitable. The breakup wasn't just a business decision, it was the culmination of years of emotional wear and tear. As a result of these deep fissures, communication between the siblings often ceased for long periods after the breakup. They might occasionally cross paths at industry events or family gatherings, but the easy camaraderie of their youth was gone. They pursued separate lives, raising families, building careers, often geographically distant from one another. The silence between them became a defining feature of their post-band relationship. Over the ensuing decades, there were sporadic attempts at reunions, often driven by nostalgia-focused package tours or requests from festivals celebrating roots music. Sometimes Rose would perform with Don, or Cal might join for a few songs. However, a full-scale lasting reunion of the surviving members never materialized. Reports suggest that even these brief on-stage encounters could be fraught with tension. Old arguments about song choices, billing, or money could resurface. The chemistry that had once seemed so effortless now required conscious effort, and the underlying resentments often proved too difficult to overcome. The magic couldn't simply be switched back on. Too much water and too much bad blood had passed under the bridge. The family that harmonized so perfectly on record struggled to find any harmony in their personal relationships. Meanwhile, Rose's solo career continued its trajectory. While her peak chart success occurred in the late 50s and early 60s, she remained a respected and active figure in country music. As musical taste shifted again in the late 60s and 70s towards the smoother countrypolitan sound, then the outlaw movement, Rose adapted while staying true to her roots. She might not have been dominating the charts, but she continued to record for various labels and maintained a loyal following through her powerful live performances. She toured tirelessly, not just in the U.S., but also internationally, particularly in Europe, where her pioneering role in rockabilly and authentic country music was often more appreciated than at home during certain periods. She became a fixture at folk festivals and roots music revivals, embraced by a new generation of musicians and fans who recognized her historical importance and admired her undiminished talent and fiery spirit. Collaborations with younger artists like bluegrass legend Bill Monroe or roots rockers helped keep her music relevant. She transitioned gracefully, if perhaps reluctantly at times, into the role of a living legend. Awards and accolades started coming in, acknowledging her decades-long contribution to American music. Interviews often focused on the glory days of the Maddox Brothers and Rose, a past she seemed to have complex feelings about, proud of the music, but still carrying the scars of the family breakup. She remained, until the very end, a consummate performer, her voice retaining much of its power, her stage presence still captivating, a rhinestone-clad link to a wilder foundational era of country music. But even as she enjoyed this late career respect, the shadow of her estranged family lingered. The immense success she achieved as a solo artist was a testament to her individual talent and resilience, but it was built on the foundation laid by the family band, a band that now existed primarily in memory and on old recordings. The story of her triumph was inextricably bound to the story of their collective failure as a family unit. The silence from and often between her brothers was a constant, poignant counterpoint to the applause she still commanded on stage. The vibrant color they brought to the world seemed to have drained from their own relationships, leaving behind shades of gray. The separate paths taken by Rose and her brothers after the band's dissolution paint a poignant picture of individual resilience and the enduring, often painful complexities of family ties strained by fame. Rose carved out a remarkable decades-long solo career, proving her own artistry and becoming a revered elder stateswoman of roots music. Dawn eventually found late-life recognition as the last link to their groundbreaking sound. Fred sought peace away from the spotlight entirely, while Cal, Henry, and Cliff largely faded from public view. But the legacy of what they created together during that explosive period from the late 1930s to the mid-1950s transcends their personal conflicts. The Maddox Brothers and Rose weren't just another family band. They were genuine musical revolutionaries whose impact rippled far beyond the confines of the country charts, shaping the very sound of American popular music in ways that are still felt today. Understanding their historical significance requires looking beyond the family drama to the sheer power and innovation of their music. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of their legacy lies in their undisputed role as pioneers of rockabilly and West Coast honky-tonk. While Sun Records in Memphis often gets the lion's share of credit for birthing rockabilly in the mid-50s, the Maddoxes were playing a supercharged, rhythmically aggressive form of country music infused with blues and boogie-woogie years earlier in California. Operating outside the more conservative influence of Nashville, they were free to absorb the diverse musical currents of the West Coast, the sophisticated swing of Bob Wills, the raw blues of migrant workers, the energy of jump blues bands. Fred Maddox's slap bass wasn't just accompaniment, it was a percussive weapon, laying down a propulsive beat that predated and directly influenced the rockabilly rhythm sections. Listen to early Sun recordings by Elvis or Carl Perkins. That driving slap bass sound owes a significant debt to Fred Maddox. Similarly, Don Maddox's electric guitar work was often years ahead of its time. While Nashville was still hesitant about amplified instruments, Don was experimenting with distortion, feedback, and wild improvisational solos that injected a raw, almost proto-punk energy into their country sound. Cal's relentless rhythm guitar provided the unwavering engine for this musical mayhem. This wasn't polite country music for sitting and listening. This was music designed for dancing, drinking, and cutting loose, the very definition of honky-tonk, but pushed to an unprecedented level of intensity. Their records, especially the 4 star sides, captured this live wire energy, influencing countless musicians, including legends like Merle Haggard and Buck Owens, and early rock and rollers who heard in their sound a blueprint for rebellion. They proved that country music could have attitude, it could have swagger, it could rock. Beyond the purely musical, their cultural impact was significant. America's Most Colorful Hillbilly Band wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was a radical statement. In an era when country performers often cultivated an image of rustic simplicity or Nashville sophistication, the Maddoxes embraced deliberate, outrageous flamboyance. Lula Maddox's homemade costumes, dripping with rhinestones and exploding with color, were a defiant assertion of individuality and showmanship. They predated the famous nudie cone suits that would later define the look of country royalty. This visual spectacle was hugely influential, demonstrating the power of image and entertainment and paving the way for future generations of country stars, from Porter Wagoner's glittering ensembles to Dolly Parton's iconic style, who understood that performance was as much about seeing as hearing. They brought a sense of theatricality and sheer fun to country music, proving it didn't have to be staid or somber. And central to their cultural significance is the towering figure of Rose Maddox. Her legacy extends far beyond her powerful voice. In a deeply conservative era and a male-dominated music genre, Rose was a force to be reckoned with. She wasn't merely the girl singer passively fronting her brother's band. She was an electrifying performer, a charismatic bandleader in her own right, and a woman who refused to be constrained by expectations. Her sassy stage persona, her willingness to tackle taboo subjects in her songs, and her fierce offstage independence made her a true pioneer for women in country music and beyond. She wasn't singing about being a victim. She often sang from a position of strength, humor, or defiance. She held her own in the rowdiest honky-tonks and commanded attention on national stages. Her influence on subsequent generations of female artists who challenged norms, from the rebellious spirit of Wanda Jackson and Loretta Lynn's plain-spoken truths to the genre-bending sass of Tanya Tucker or Casey Musgraves, is undeniable. Rose Maddox demonstrated that a woman in country music could be complex, powerful, funny, flawed, and utterly captivating, paving the way for artists who demanded to be heard on their own terms. She wasn't just singing country. She was living a form of proto-feminism in rhinestones and cowboy boots. However, intertwined with these triumphs of innovation and influence is the darker side of their story, which also serves as a significant cautionary legacy. The Maddox saga stands as a stark, poignant example of the destructive potential of fame and the music industry on family dynamics. They were the ultimate family band, forged in the crucible of shared poverty, their music seemingly an extension of their unbreakable bond. Yet the very success born from that unity ultimately became the wedge that drove them apart. Their story vividly illustrates the inherent conflicts in mixing blood and business. Charlie Maddox's patriarchal management style, while instrumental in their rise, bred resentments over control and financial transparency that never fully healed. The intense, often isolating pressure of constant touring, magnified by living and working 24/7 with the same family members, created a breeding ground for conflict. Sibling rivalries, natural in any family, were amplified by the unequal distribution of spotlight and public attention, particularly concerning Rose's stardom. Johnny Whiteside's biography suggests specific instances: arguments over billing, jealousy regarding solo features, disputes over who contributed most to their success that poisoned the well of family affection. Their inability to separate professional disagreements from personal relationships proved catastrophic. Furthermore, their experience offers a raw look at the brutal realities of the mid-century music industry, especially for artists operating outside the mainstream Nashville power structure. Their early dealings with Four Star Records likely involved exploitative contracts, typical of small independent labels at the time. Even their move to Columbia didn't guarantee complete artistic freedom or financial clarity. The pressure to conform to commercial trends, the lack of agency over song choices or image, the relentless demand for new product, these were industry norms that could stifle creativity and exacerbate personal tensions. Rose's struggles, including navigating a pregnancy scare under intense secrecy and asserting her independence against controlling male figures, highlight the specific vulnerabilities and pressures faced by women artists in that era. Their story isn't just about music, it's about power, control, and the often unequal relationship between artists and the industry machine. Why does their story still resonate? Partly because their music, in its raw energy and emotional honesty, remains timeless. Tracks like Milk Cow Blues still sound electrifying today, a pure shot of unfiltered American roots music. Partly because Rose stands as such a compelling figure of talent and resilience, but largely, perhaps, because their story taps into universal truths about the complexities of family, the allure and danger of ambition, and the bittersweet nature of success. They achieved the American dream in its most dramatic form, rising from literal rags to rhinestone-studded riches, but they paid a profound personal price. Their fractured harmony serves as a lasting cautionary echo. In the end, the story of the Maddox Brothers and Rose plays out like one of their own boogie numbers, full of exhilarating highs, driving rhythms, unexpected turns, and a lingering undercurrent of the blues. They were indeed America's most colorful hillbilly band, exploding out of Depression-era poverty with a sound and style that was revolutionary. Their music was a joyous, defiant noise, a crucial bridge between the worlds of country, blues, and nascent rock and roll, leaving an indelible mark on the sonic landscape of America. Fred's slap bass, Don's wild guitar, Cal's driving rhythm, and Rose's powerhouse vocals created a sound that still crackles with life decades later. Rose, in particular, endures as an icon, a trailblazing woman who kicked down doors in a man's world, her voice a potent cocktail of sass, strength, and vulnerability. She proved that country music could be fierce, funny, and utterly fearless. The band's collective influence on rockabilly, honky-tonk, and the visual presentation of country music is undeniable, a legacy finally recognized, albeit sometimes belatedly. Yet the dazzling harmony they perfected on countless stages proved tragically elusive within the complicated bonds of their own family. The laughter that punctuated their songs eventually gave way to silence. The shared struggles that forged their early unity couldn't withstand the corrosive pressures of fame, finance, and fractured personal relationships. Their story is a powerful, bittersweet reminder that even the strongest ties can fray under the weight of the spotlight, that success often demands sacrifices too painful to bear, and that the brightest stars can sometimes burn out or drift apart in bitterness and regret. The Maddox Brothers and Rose left behind a legacy written in driving rhythms and dazzling rhinestones, a soundtrack for Saturday nights and broken hearts. Their music endures, a vibrant testament to their raw talent and groundbreaking spirit. But their story also leaves us with a lingering question, an echo of sadness beneath the boogie beat. What is the price of turning family into fame? And can that price ever truly be paid? They gave the world the sound of joyful abandon, but paid for it ultimately with the quiet heartbreak of a family undone.